Lovely. Okay, right. So we'll make a start. We've already carried out our very quick poll. So if I can just explain to you, just close that. So there we go. Okay. So this evening's session is what we hope to achieve is what we've got here on the first slide. This has been very much put together with the mind that the pandemic that we've experienced over the last couple of years has created many difficulties we've realised for village halls, especially with the added regulations that you've had to take on board in running your facilities. And this is produced really a kind of a myriad of additional jobs for you to do, additional things for you to consider as a committee, as trustees, and puts added burden on you in order that you can operate your facility not only within your governance and the governing documents that you have, but also with the new regulations that have kind of been forced on us because of the situation. Nationally, what we're hearing is that it's very much about there's feedback coming through from not just village hall charities, but all charities about trustee burnout, and trustees are feeling very exhausted by all of the added pressures that they've had over the last couple of years. So committees are experiencing loss of trustees, and then there's the whole issue of recruiting new trustees, recruiting new volunteers, and then inducting them into your charity. So we thought this was probably a timely subject for you to take part in and to have an understanding. There is no magic solution to any of this. I have to say at the beginning, really, I've been in your position as a trustee of a village hall and the chairman of a village hall, and what I'm hoping we can set out for you this evening is a toolbox really of things that you can consider and apply to your committee and your situation. So let's move on. So we're going to start with the question around recruitment. So the starting point I would always say with a committee is, have you actually done a skills audit recently? If not, I think it's a really good place to start. It gives you the opportunity to look for the gaps that you have in your current committee in terms of skills and knowledge and expertise. But it also gives you an opportunity to maybe find those hidden talents from trustees who, quite often people don't like to shout about the things they know, or sometimes even forget about the skills and knowledge that they do carry with them in life. And a skills audit is a really good opportunity to have that discussion with individuals and find out a bit about them, and find out what, would they be interested in maybe doing something new on the committee. So at the end of the session, I'll run through a list of templates and materials that we have for you. And one of those templates I've got is a skills audit template, which you can use, adapt and amend to your own committee's needs. But it kind of sets out a template for you of a good place to start. I mean, you can go through the same process as well with your volunteers. So if you've got a bank of volunteers already, do the skills audit with them, because again, you might have some surprising knowledge that's sitting there untapped into currently. So it's worth having an evening where you can kind of share all this information together. The one thing I would stress to you, and I've put this very early in the slides, is whatever you do, don't wait until you are down to your last 2 or 3 trustees before you decide to recruit new trustees. I have on occasions come across committees that find themselves in that position where, either people have mass resigned, or the fact that they just feel they can't get new trustees, and so they're kind of like limping along with a couple of people. I would really stress how important succession planning is. When I was a chairman of a village hall, succession planning was something that we discussed on a regular basis. I used to make sure it was always on the agenda. What you don't want to do is find yourself in a position where the chairman's taken ill, or the treasurer has got family commitments and they can no longer carry out their function. You take key people out of the committee and you've got a really big problem, because you have massive gaps and nobody to fill them. So I always try to work my committee on the succession planning, not only by bringing new people into the committee, but also to look at how you can get all of those key roles shadowed by somebody else. So, make sure that your booking secretary has another person on the committee who can back up those skills. So they've spent some time with the booking secretary to understand how the function works and what the processes and procedures are. So you might not just be looking for trustees to serve on your committee. You might also be looking for how to engage other people in your committee to in your community to support and help your committee sort of long term. I often hear trustees say, oh, nobody wants to help us, nobody wants to be available to support the charity any longer. But I think people do like to be asked and people like to be valued, and I think there's a real opportunity to if you can identify people in your community, or the power of networking is quite good, because if you're talking to somebody about the committee, either becoming a trustee or volunteering for a couple of hours on for the charity, if they're not prepared to do it or don't have the time to do it, they might know somebody who does. So it's really good to have those conversations in the community and and talk to people about about the opportunities, really, because I think there are some really great opportunities for people within these village hall charities, where you don't have to commit quite as much time as it takes to be a trustee and sit on the management committee. There are other opportunities where somebody might only have an hour a week to spare, but it means that they could unlock for you, or they could make the teas for a group or something. So it's looking as wide as possible about where you can make best use of people. Let's have a little look at the types of volunteers. You're probably already familiar with this, but I think it's worth kind of reflecting on the types of volunteers that can come along and the opportunities there might be in the community. So I would consider a long-term volunteer is a trustee like yourselves, somebody who is prepared to to take on a significant role, and they're giving a lot of hours to the charity and have a very structured role within that charity. A short-term volunteer might be just somebody who is there to offer support for a one-off event, or a short-term project, a fundraising project, or you've got a kitchen refurb and somebody's prepared to write the funding application forms for you, for example. So they might only offer 10, 20 hours, they might only offer a couple of hours, but whatever they do offer is still really, really valuable to your charity. Employer supported volunteers is another good way of getting people involved and engaged in your charity. It's really worth thinking about larger firms in your area. For example, banks quite often offer people up to support local charities. I was talking to, it wasn't a village hall charity admittedly, but I was talking to a lady the other day who worked for HSBC, and they had seconded her to a charity to work with them for 3 months, specifically around fundraising and marketing of that charity. So there are still organisations out there who are prepared to offer employees for a period of time to a charity. I live just over the Suffolk border, and I live very close to the 2 American air bases, and what our village hall was always very lucky in doing was being able to get the American air bases, the American forces, to come in, and they would clean up our gardens, they would help decorate the building. So they would come in, they would land on a particular day, we would have tasks for them, they would do those tasks, they'd be really grateful, they'd have a great day, we'd have a great day. And you know, it was almost an event to celebrate the communities coming together. So do think about that. Think about the opportunities in your own area. You know, what fairly large businesses do you have who could maybe support you in that way? Unemployed volunteers, there's always an opportunity for somebody, if they are looking for work, that they might be able to offer you some services. It could be, as I've listed here, you know, it could be work experience, they could be gaining a new skill, but these are things that they could add to their CV, and you know, you've got an opportunity there to offer them support and a little bit of opportunity and knowledge really that they can gain from your charity by volunteering, helping and supporting you. So I was really going to ask, I'll stop sharing at this stage just for a minute, because it's an opportunity for us really to have a discussion about, you know, why do you volunteer, or why do you think others would want to volunteer for your organisation? So what do people think? What made you want to volunteer and become a trustee of your charity? Anita?
It was very much about, I moved to Wadden, to the village, and everybody knew everybody, and for me it was quite a selfish thing in that it was a means to an end of getting to know people and feeling that I wanted people to know that I wanted to contribute towards the community and to be part of, not to just be somebody that just lived in the village. I actually wanted to contribute. And I feel that, I don't know whether Karen thinks the same, but the people that do volunteer, whether it is as a trustee or whether it's more informal volunteering for our village hall, do that for that reason, because it is that community spirit. I think for me certainly it is.
I think that's very common, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Anybody else got any other ideas and suggestions?
It was slightly different for me because I didn't actually volunteer. I was on a parish council at the time, and the way our constitution set up, the parish council kind of nominates a couple of people from the parish council to go onto the reading room committee. So I kind of got in that way. But it tends to be people who, almost as you said at the start or earlier on, it's someone's got an interest in a particular topic that then wants to influence what can be done. And luckily our village hall actually has a decent amount of money, income streams, so it can actually do some practical good with the money it has, and so people often join for that reason, to kind of help steer a project, I think.
Oh, that's really good. And it's such an important link for the charity with the parish council. Sometimes you can see that there's friction between a parish council and a village hall, and it can be such a shame, because it's a really good link, because the organisations can offer each other so much help and support, I think. Any other comments?
Yeah, the reason why I originally joined, that was back in the early days, was trying to save our village hall from not being sold off, because that's what was going to happen. I mean, at one time the parish council had thought about selling it off, but there were several of us that fought hard to keep it as a village hall, so we've got somewhere for the village people to,
absolutely,
you know, use.
And was that because of lack of interest in trustees that you were in a position that it had to be sold, or?
Well, that was before the trustees took on, before we set it up as a
Right.
trust. So
Okay.
then we did, you know, after several years, then we did set it up as a trust,
Yeah.
which I stayed on.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, right. So let's carry on with the presentation and get it to screen share again. Oh, hold on, let me stop sharing there. Let's go right. Okay, there we go. Okay, so can everybody see the presentation okay? Yeah?
Yeah.
Good, okay. So these are some of the thoughts that I've put down for why people might volunteer. You might agree or disagree with me, but these are kind of the common things that I come across when speaking to trustees about, you know, why they wanted to get involved. And it can range from somebody who I've met solicitors who are trustees who want to pass on their legal advice and support to their local community, or their accountants, or in some cases, you know, they've lived in the village all their life and they want to make sure that the charity continues. So there's a whole raft of reasons why, you know, people want to be involved, and they want to make sure that their village hall charity succeeds. So when we talk about recruitment, I think it's really important to be clear about the role of what you're asking people to do, whether it's a volunteering role or whether it's a formal trustee role. As I said at the beginning, we will be providing some templates for you at the end. I'll probably send them out to you tomorrow, but there will be role descriptions, but I'm also going to send you one of our information sheets, which is called Your Village Hall Management Committee. And within that document, it's a really good place for people to start when they first become a trustee. So it's a really good read for somebody in terms of the processes of where you would, you know, when you're coming onto a committee, and what you need to do and how it functions, like how an agenda is set up, how you take minutes, how we set up an induction pack, and all of those types of things. So it's a very step-by-step guide, which I think new trustees coming into your organisation would really value. I would also say that, you know, when you've got new people coming into your organisation, it's really important that you don't overwhelm them, because especially becoming a trustee, it can be quite a daunting process. There's a lot to take on board in a short space of time. So, you know, it's about getting that delicate balance between providing somebody with the information, but not overwhelming them with the kind of the magnitude of the volume of information that there is at the same time. So I appreciate that. That is a delicate balance for anybody to manage. One of the things I'm suggesting on this slide is that one of the things you might want to consider is setting up a subgroup or a working group. You do have to be really careful in this area. If you're setting up a subgroup or a working group where you're involving people from the wider community who are not trustees of the charity, it's really important to have a terms of reference in place. The legal responsibility for the charity will always sit with the trustees. So all of the final decisions must be taken by the trustees, especially around you know, health and safety, safeguarding aspects, and also governance aspects, and obviously financial aspects. So having a terms of reference for your volunteers on a subgroup, setting out what they can and cannot do, and what they have to feed back to you. You know, it gives everybody a really firm understanding from the beginning about what the expectations are, and it avoids some of those pitfalls where people get upset because they feel as though, you know, the trustees want to control and manage everything. But in some cases, it is the trustees who have to legally take the decisions and not the volunteers, because the responsibility legally doesn't sit with them. So as long as you're making that clear from the very beginning, you know, it should work, you know, fairly well by having your management committee, but then you could have a subgroup that, you know, is going to work on maybe fundraising events or a fundraising project, or a, you know, summer annual event, or whatever the scenario might be. But, you know, many hands make light work, don't they? So it's a way of the trustees being able to, in a sense, deliver more, because they've got many more people helping them to deliver the outcomes for the charity. So I'm encouraging you really to think as widely as possible in terms of recruiting to your organisation, where there might be, you know, gaps in knowledge and gaps in experience. You know, people can fulfil some of these roles very easily as volunteers and not having to become, you know, full trustees and sitting on the management committee. what I'm hearing from trustees is that people are very put off by, you know, by being bound by the governance around being a trustee and the legal aspect, and what they feel is too much liability for them. And so if you can get people to volunteer, then, you know, they're still, you know, still giving something back to their community and still adding value to your charity. I can use the example of my village hall when I was a trustee. We had a fantastic chap who gave many years and many hours of volunteer time to that charity, opening the doors, setting out chairs and tables, you know, doing real sort of, you know, donkey work stuff that took hours and hours of time, looking up late at night, washing up, doing all sorts of jobs. He was an absolute star. And we couldn't have run it without him. But he didn't like committees. He didn't like being bound by the whole committee structure, but he wanted to give his time to the charity. And, you know, we valued everything he gave to that committee so much. He was such an asset to the committee by helping and supporting the charity, but he just wasn't interested in being a trustee. And I think if you come across people like that, you know, they've got so much to give, but that, you know, not everybody is a committee type person, are they? So, you know, kind of consider that when you're out there recruiting people and looking for people to help and support your charity. Especially one of the areas that I think that you might find people who can maybe give you an hour or a couple of hours is around social media and marketing. You know, they might not be able to commit to regular committee meetings, but they might be able to, you know, spend a couple of hours putting a newsletter together or running a Facebook page for you. So, you know, you could put an advert out saying that, you know, is there anybody out there who has got social media experience and is prepared to help us? You might find a young person who is particularly interested or wanting to get into, you know, a marketing role when they maybe leave college or something. And they might be just looking for that opportunity to gain some experience. So it's worth kind of breaking things down and thinking about where the opportunities might be for different skills for people in your community. As I said to you, there is no kind of magic solution to any of this really, and you'll probably look at this list and you'll think, oh, you know, it's kind of the old list that's churned out, and in many senses it is, but really I've put this list here because it's about having that toolbox. It's about not necessarily using one of the things on the list, but using a combination of them. You all know your communities best, and you all know how your communities function, and one community won't function the same as another in terms of you know, attracting people and getting people involved. One of the things I put on there is about new projects. People love new projects. It excites them, it engages them. You know, if you're you know, building an extension or something, people will be interested in what's happening and will want to find out what's going on in your community. And so it's an opportunity to say to people about what skills have you got, and you know, is there any opportunity for you to help and support us? I visited a village hall yesterday who Leverington up in Finland, and they had spent lockdown refurbishing their village hall, and they've taken out an old stage and they've built new toilets and they've put a new kitchen in and completely decorated through. So they've spent the lockdown really productive, and they had so many people from the community come forward and offer their time, help and support. And it might be that, you know, they could spend a couple of hours emulsioning the walls, but they offered their time. You know, they told me about there's a young lady who she was helping one of the trustees, and she was like holding the ladder basically for him, just to make sure he was safe while he was climbing up the ladder. So, and there was another chap who was, you know, like 81 and making the teas. So it was great to hear the story about this community coming together to you know, refurbish this hall at a time when, you know, we were all suffering from, you know, lockdown and the pandemic, and they managed all their social distancing and, you know, whatever they had to do to keep everybody safe. But it was such a heartwarming story to hear about, you know, 20 odd people coming together to support the building in a voluntary capacity. I've added on the bottom of this slide about, is there any ideas? I don't know if you've got anything that you want to add to this list in terms of things that have worked for you. Has anybody got any ideas or suggestions?
It's not to add to the list, but just to say that sort of the third one from the bottom worked for us the other day. So we had a sort of pop-up pub, and that got people in it who probably wouldn't have used the hall for anything else. And once they sort of went inside the hall and actually saw what was inside this building that they'd walked past loads and not been in, they were like, oh, that's really interesting. And it just prompts that conversation. So almost getting people to use your facility can prompt volunteers, I think, for us.
I think you're absolutely right. And I've had this conversation with people before about, I think there's a level of confidence needed in order to walk over the threshold. If you're asking somebody to walk into a new environment on their own, they don't know anybody, you know, it can be quite intimidating, but having that pop-up pub is a perfect excuse for people to get together and understand what's going on. So I think, you know, that's a fab example. Okay. I have factored in for a short break, just 5 minutes, but are people just happy to carry on?
Yeah, I'm happy.
Yeah, is everybody happy then?
Yeah, I'm happy.
Great, I'll just carry on then, because we're quite a small group, so I think it's easier just to keep going. This morning was quite busy because I had, you know, 15 odd people. Okay. So we're now going to look at the induction side of things and what perhaps you should have in place for inducting not just volunteers, but your trustees as well. And there is a slight difference in terms of the amount of information that the two kind of groups would need. I've already mentioned about the Your Village Hall Management Committee information sheet, which I will send around to all of you. And that does include you know, the necessary templates and a list of what you should include in your induction pack. So, and if you need anything, you can just give me a ring or drop me a line, and I can help and support you to put something together. But we'll just look at these icons in terms of the basics of what I think you probably need as part of your process. So I've already talked about having role descriptions, and not only just for trustees, but for volunteers as well. I think it's really important that people understand what their role is. And then, you know, they know the remit that they've got to work within, whether they're, you know, volunteering for something or absolutely for a trustee. You need to know what you need to deliver if you're the treasurer or the secretary, or, you know, what your responsibilities are as the chairman. So as I said, we've got some templates for you that you can have a look at, and you can see if you want to use them or adapt them for your own committees. I've suggested here an application form for volunteers. I was asked this question this morning about, you know, how do you determine whether, you know, a volunteer is right for your organisation? And I think if you've got an application kind of form process, it can feel a bit top heavy, but you've then got the opportunity of having all of the information that you need in terms of emergency contact details, their address, their telephone number, everything else in one place. Obviously, bearing in mind you've got to consider GDPR regulations and keep that information safe once you've got it. But you've got all of their information gathered together. And then, you know, if depending on the size of your organisation, if as a committee, some of the trustees want to, you know, talk to volunteers or induct volunteers into the organisation, you know, it's a really good idea to you know, to do that process and make sure people feel comfortable in the role that you're asking them to do, rather than just dropping them into it. For trustees, it's slightly more of a rigid process, really, for trustees. Once you've come through the process of either being elected or appointed at the AGM, depending on your governing document, or co-opted at a committee meeting, you would need to sign a declaration form. If you don't have declaration forms already, I can provide you with a link to the Charity Commission website, or a document that ACRE uses as a declaration form. But all trustees should sign declaration forms setting out that they are taking their roles and responsibilities, and they fully understand those roles and responsibilities, and signing that declaration. Volunteers' records, I've already kind of touched on that in the sense of an application form. You need to make sure you keep them safe and secure. And I would also recommend that if you don't currently have a volunteering policy in place, you might want to consider that. And the volunteering policy, in my opinion, should also include a kind of complaints process, so that if something does go wrong, with either the trustees or with the volunteer themselves, you've got a process to follow in which you can address whatever situation it might be. It might be a misunderstanding. It might be that you need to ask that volunteer to leave their role. They might not be acting within your health and safety policy, or whatever the scenario might be. It's important that you have a process and a protocol in place of how you're going to manage those situations. I've added on here the expenses claim form, and obviously a policy that would sit behind that. As trustees, you're probably all aware that you're entitled to claim out-of-pocket expenses, so travelling to a meeting, or you've bought postage stamps, or whatever the scenario might be. So if you haven't got a policy and an expenses claim form in place, consider that, and also consider that in relation to what your volunteers might be doing. Last icon there is about having all of the information pulled together into either a handbook, a simple document for your volunteers. Your trustees will need something which is slightly more than a handbook. They will need a pack, and that pack should include things such as the governing document for your charity, so that the trustees fully understand how the charity operates, and that they've read the governing document. And also, it's recommended that all trustees have a copy of the Charity Commission document CC3, which is called, it's the Essential Trustee. It's quite a weighty document, but it sets out the legal principles of charity law, and how you would what you need to do to abide by that charity law as a charity trustee. So just thinking about the induction pack for a trustee, obviously I've already said you wouldn't need such a full pack for your volunteers. I just want to highlight a couple of the elements on here. I promise I won't go through each one of the bullets. I just want to pick out the first two, really. So the first one being an information sheet. We will give you a template for the information sheet that you can look at and complete for your charity. But it's a really good idea to have that document, because it sets down everything that a trustee would need to know in a snapshot. So a brief history about the charity, who the key people are, the chairman, treasurer, secretary, the contact details for those people. It can include policies, it can include a list of the policies that trustees should read. The document can be as flexible as you want to be, but what I'm trying to say is I would absolutely recommend that you have something in place that really captures your charity in one short information document that trustees can have as a kind of a quick read to understand the charity when they do become trustees. I've already mentioned about the governing document, so bullet point 2, can't stress enough how important that is, that trustees see the governing document. There might be a lease in place, so if you have a lease, it's important that trustees also understand that lease. Quite often leases can have strange covenants in that charity trustees need to abide by, so it's well worth spending some time as a committee reviewing those documents, understanding those documents, and the Charity Commission do recommend that every 5 years you should review your governing documents. So do make time to have a look at it.
Lisa,
Yes.
can I just ask
Absolutely.
quickly? In our trust deed, we've got a list of all of the members of all of the trustees. Obviously, that changes over the course of time. Do we need to get that, because our trust deed has been legally signed off by solicitors when it was in its infancy, when it was first implemented? Every time we make a change to that trust deed, do we need to have kind of a legal sign off to it?
No, so it's kind of a piece of string when you're talking about governing documents, because everything I'm going to say is it depends. I would imagine the list of trustees that you're referring to are the first set of trustees for the charity. So that's the historical record of who were the trustees at the time when the charity was set up.
Okay.
The document usually then goes on to say the management committee will be made up of, and so that's the kind of the rolling aspect of the document, where you elect or appoint those people every year on an ongoing basis, and their names do not need to appear in the governing document.
Okay, super, thank you.
A common one that we do find where an amendment is required is where a charity has a list of organisations that have the power to appoint, and that might be the parish council, that might be the PCC, you know, the Cubs, whoever, WI. They change. They change over time. Clubs come, they go, and so what we can do, if you are in that position where that list is out of date, and this is why we say it's important to review your governing document, if that list becomes out of date, we can use what's referred to as Section 280 of the Charities Act. And basically what you do is we check the governing document to make sure that you can make amendments to the governing document. If you can, we use Section 280 of the Charities Act to put a resolution to a public meeting. On agreement of that resolution, that can be signed off by the chairman. It's then uploaded to the Charity Commission website, and the Charity Commission will either accept or decline that resolution. In the 6 years I've been doing this job, I've not known the Charity Commission to come back and say they refused a resolution. So there are ways that you can amend your governing document. The only things you can't amend are the objects, a dissolution clause, and some financial aspects. Generally, administrative clauses you can amend.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. So then just thinking about you've got new trustees, you've got new volunteers. I think it's really important to make sure that when you've got them, that those individuals feel valued. And so some of the things on my little list here are a little bit cheesy. You might not want to do certificates or award evenings, but think about they're really here just to kind of like prompt that thought about how important it is to make sure people are valued. So it might be that, you know, you can hold a social event for your volunteers. You know, the kind of like the pop-up pub scenarios are, you know, is a really kind of like good idea of having that celebration event so that your volunteers can come together and you can, you know, celebrate the fact that your charity is doing well and you've all helped to make it so. The bits that I've highlighted on here is the keep things interesting. You will lose people if they get bored or if they feel overwhelmed by the role that you're giving them. So kind of just bear that in mind. You know, it's good to have those opportunities when you can check in with your volunteers and also the trustees who sit on your management committee. Somebody might be feeling really overwhelmed by the amount of work they've got to do, but you know, you might be able to share that job between two people so somebody doesn't feel quite so overwhelmed. If your volunteers or indeed your trustees, you know, want to leave, I kind of feel that it's a really good way to get feedback, whether it's kind of good feedback or bad feedback from individuals. It's going to help you shape what you do in the future. If somebody has felt overwhelmed and overburdened by the role, if they tell you about that, then you can change that in the future. You can make sure that somebody doesn't feel in that position again, and that you've got kind of support for them, to make sure that they can do their role in a way that they can. At the end of the day, when you're a charity trustee or a charity volunteer, you're doing it in your own time, aren't you? And you're not doing it because you kind of want to be, kicked or berated for not being able to do the role correctly. Just one little odd story I've got for you is many years ago, when I in a previous role I was doing, I came across the chairman of the village hall, who I had a conversation with him at an event, and he said to me, he said, "Oh, I don't know, I can't find anybody to help me. I can't get trustees to come on board. I can't get volunteers to come on board. What am I going to do? It's me kind of like banging away at this, and I haven't really got any help and support." He then walked away from me, went over to one of his few volunteers that he had, and he started shouting at this individual and really belittling them in front of people at this event. And this has kind of stuck with me, because I thought, this is why this man doesn't have any support around him, no help and no trustees coming forward, because nobody wants to volunteer to be put in that position. That's clearly why he wasn't attracting people to the charity. And that was not only a shame for him, but it was a shame for the charity as well, because the charity was suffering because it wasn't actually being able to attract the people from the community that it desperately needed. So if we have a quick look at making charities decisions, because I've spoken a lot about trustees and volunteers, and they are distinctly different in terms of how they would operate for your organisation. So trustees have that legal responsibility, and when I send you a PDF version of these slides, you'll be able to click on the link in the presentation, and it will take you to the decision-making guidance issued by the Charity Commission. And basically what the Charity Commission say is that you must use the standard which is set out on this slide in order to make your decisions for your charity. And your governing document, again, is the place where you need to reflect on in terms of who can take decisions for the charity, and more importantly, who cannot take decisions for the charity. And inevitably, it's going to say it's the charity trustees, the management committee, who are there to take all of the important financial and governance decisions for your charity. So you need to be very clear with anybody who's carrying out a volunteer role, if they're the sort of volunteer that's attending your committee meetings. So for example, if you have a volunteer minute taker, or you've got a bookkeeper who is a volunteer, or indeed, even if you have, in some situations, you can have a paid trustee or a paid bookkeeper. Within the rules in some governing documents, it allows for paid officers. So again, that's why I'm saying it's really important that you understand your governing document. If you're in that scenario where you have people either volunteering or in a paid post, you need to be very clear with them that they cannot take part in the discussions, and they cannot take part in actually the voting aspect of your committee business, because their role is very different from that of the trustees. So this slide here really is just my attempt to kind of highlight the importance of making sure that you have clear minutes of all of the decisions that you've taken, that your minutes are an accurate record of your meetings. And in some cases, if you've got a contentious matter that you're discussing, it might be a large financial project that you're undertaking or something, the committee can't agree. In some cases, you might have to do, a recorded vote, so that you're actually taking down the person's name and how they voted, either in favour or against or abstaining. So, having those accurate records is so important for your committee. And again, this is what the Charity Commission, this slide really highlights what the Charity Commission says in terms of taking complex and difficult decisions. Okay, my next slide, and I hope you can bear with me for just a few minutes on this. It's a case study that I had a conversation with Neil Muirhead from Gamlingay Eco Hub very recently, and he agreed to do this case study for me because I thought it would be a value for people to hear his story. So if I can just play this for you.
I'm Neil Muirhead, and I'm chairman of the trustees of the Gamlingay Community Centre. This is a community centre built originally in the 60s but transformed 10 years ago with a major extension and refurbishment, partly locally funded, partly grant funded, and partly via a loan. The centre provides extensive space for community uses and activities within Gamlingay, together with accommodating the Gamlingay Library and Parish Council office. The building is known as the Eco Hub. It's one of the greenest buildings in Cambridgeshire. It's got solar energy, it's got ground source heat pumps, it's got photovoltaic panels. We even harvest our rainwater to flush our loos with. Low energy lighting, high levels of insulation. So it's a very green, eco-friendly building, and it is the hub of the village. So Eco Hub rather fits nicely. We've got a very broad range of community activities and classes and interest groups taking place within the centre, subject to COVID, of course. Normally speaking, that would be generating an annual letting income of something like £80,000 a year. I joined the trustees about 3 years ago, and there were 7 or 8 trustees who have been around for a long time. About the start of the COVID crisis and the lockdown, the chair lady, who was fairly recently appointed, resigned both as chair and as trustee because her husband had been taken ill and she needed to devote more time to looking after him. I was deputy chair and kind of by default stepped in. But by then, the old guard had vanished. Some had moved away, some had seen the writing on the wall, but I was left with a group of 3 people. Then one of them left, so I was now a trustee chair of a group of 2, which didn't give us a quorum, so that's quite a problem. At this point, I'm probably one of the few people that actually said, wow, COVID's a good thing, because COVID shut the Eco Hub down. The shutdown happened, we had to close it down, all activity stopped, all the staff were furloughed, we sort of switched off everything we possibly could to reduce our costs. So actually there wasn't too much for the trustees to do. But I still had the problem. I was one of 2 trustees. I had to get on with things and find new trustees as quickly as we could. So my challenge was a recruitment campaign and fast. Well, I drafted an advertisement seeking new trustees, which went out on social media and local magazines and publications. But what I decided to do was try and define the role a bit more than just come and become a trustee. I wanted trustees that would come and have a function. They would have a role to play. They could be a champion of something that was going on. Because if you give people something to do, they can get much more enthusiastic than just turning up to the monthly meeting. So we got those advertisements out, and lo and behold, we got a lot of good interest. I had 5 responses to the adverts. I also did a bit of networking. Networking is an interesting thing. You talk to people not because you think that they will become a trustee, because they might know somebody who will become a trustee. So you've got to sell the role to your contact and then hope that that goes out. It worked. I got 2 come through from that route. So suddenly I've got 7 new trustees to bring on board. I invited them all to come and meet me at the Eco Hub. We all sort of followed the rules with masks and social distancing and all that sort of stuff. And I talked them through the history of the Eco Hub and how it come about, what goes on there, the sort of activities, daily, weekly, monthly, periodic. Talk them through the responsibilities of becoming a trustee. Because actually the way we operate, we've got the Gambling Gate Community Centre Limited, which is a limited company, but that is a charitable trust. So by becoming a trustee, you also become a director of a company. So there are some sort of, potentially onerous responsibilities there. So it's important that these people understood what that was about. Also talk them through the relationship we've got with the parish council, who actually own the building, but they lease it to GCC. We've got a finance agreement in place, which is a bit of a buffer against potential financial problems. So that's quite a nice story to tell. I then took each candidate on a bit of a tour of the building, but it is an interesting building to have a look round. And most of them knew about it, but hadn't been and had a look round. Talk to them about, I wanted trustees to come in and meet our customers and meet their customers and meet our staff and support the staff and get involved. I was also teasing out of them what skills they've got, which I thought we could use to the sort of champion role. And I was lucky in that respect. I had a really good crowd. I'd already decided to give them a role, a champion's role, if you like. And as I then went back to them, all of them they would like to become trustees. So off we went. I provided them with a pack, all the forms they needed to read and understand, and all the things they needed to fill in. But let me give you some examples of those champion roles. The lady who works in a local nursery in the village, and she's a volunteer at one of our youth clubs that's held at the youth club. She's attended lots of courses and extensive knowledge in safeguarding both children and adults. Quite an important thing these days. I asked her to be the champion trustee for overviewing safeguarding. She's since written a new safeguarding policy. She's involved with Lisa Aker and has produced a terrific piece of work, which is our new policy on safeguarding. Another lady, physically disabled. I asked her to be the champion trustee with an overview of disability and inclusion. One that we haven't got a very good policy on, and it was a bit weak. And these days, inclusion is very far-reaching. She's really taken on with that. We're providing her with some generic stuff, some of it from Ada, that she could work with and supporting her, but she's got her teeth into that one. I had a guy with a career in business consultancy, but he loved all things legal, and he's got a diploma in the law. He's become my champion of law. He's helping us write those policy documents. He's helping us with terms and conditions, and he's been really helpful in trying to interpret the law which sits in behind the COVID roadmap, which is all been a bit vague. Boris says we do this, but what does the actual law say behind that? So there's another great role. Another gentleman, long career in business development. He happens to be the chair of the Gambling Day local magazine, the Gazette, and he's a parish councillor, so good guy to have. I asked him to become the sort of champion of business management, business development and sales. Sarah, one of our managers, takes responsibility for most of that, but this guy, Larry, has really brought some good thinking into her plans. But we've got a great programme of stuff lined up for September to launch the Eco Hub post-COVID. Another guy, career as a technical engineer, he's with Airbus, loves to fix things. So he's become my champion of running repairs. He's in there replacing door locks and tap washers and so on, which is saving us money, but he loves it. The real interest, all 8 trustees, and including me, have got our champion's role. The great thing is when we have a trustees meeting, the biggest item on the agenda is these people that all come and tell us what they've been doing in their patch. And that really creates a debate, interaction, and gets things going. So by getting trustees involved in a function, something they can own, something theirs, and contribute to makes a huge difference than just turning up for a monthly meeting and logging through an agenda. So yeah, I think we work quite well.
Okay. I hope you didn't mind me sharing that with you. I just thought it was such a good example of a committee that had gone from the legal minimum number of trustees that the Charity Commission recommend to then rebuilding their committee to something that's much stronger than what they had before. And I think that Neil and his team have done such a good job over such a short period of time, and I just felt that it was worth sharing it. So I hope you agree with me that that was worth the short video. In terms of what I'm going to send you after the session today, is I've listed here the items that I've talked about earlier on. So the information sheet primarily, and then we've got some templates for you, and a skills audit template that hopefully again you'll find useful. You can and amend them, you know, to suit your own circumstances, because obviously every charity and every charity's governing document is slightly different. So, you know, when you read, be careful when you read them to make sure that you know, you do apply it to your charity and not just take the main text. I've got something in chat here. Let me just have a look. Okay, so you wanted to ask more about the paid roles. We have a booking clerk and a secretary. Okay. Both, it is a remuneration payment within the rules. What you just said about being part of the decision concerns me. Our booking clerk does make decisions along with some of the trustees about higher costs and other things. I'm now concerned it isn't allowed. Could you give me information, please? Okay, I'm happy to do that for you now, although you've given me your email address. So in terms of making decisions, if you've got a recommendation, let me roll it back. If you've got a committee meeting, and committee meetings should only include charity trustees, so those people who are elected or appointed to the charity. If you decide as trustees you want to invite other people to attend, those people can present to your committee. So in terms of your booking secretary, or in terms of any other volunteer that you have who you invited to your meeting, they can obviously give you information, give you advice, and then it is for you to discuss and debate as trustees whether you accept that. So if your booking secretary is giving you advice on her opinion or his opinion in terms of, let's use the example of the fees should go up by 10%. If the booking secretary is coming to you and saying, my advice to the committee is, that's fine, and you would discuss and debate that as trustees, but the booking secretary as a volunteer wouldn't vote on that decision. Does that help, Laura? Do you want to unmute, Laura?
Sorry, I was trying to unmute. Apologies. Yes, thank you. No, that's really helpful. I just, got a bit concerned for a minute. You know, just wanted to check.
And that's why it's important to have roles and responsibilities written down, really, and to highlight the difference between your volunteers and your trustees. And within the templates that I give you, there is one for secretary, and you can develop, or you could develop for your booking secretary, a roles and responsibility. And if it is a volunteer role or it's a paid role, then you can actually, just one of those bullet points would have to say, you know, you're there to give advice to the committee, but obviously you would not vote on decisions and outcomes.
Okay, brilliant, thank you.
But at least everybody then knows where the roles and responsibilities are, and they know where they stand. I think that's the important message I wanted to give from today. All right.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, let me stop sharing. So were there any other questions or anything that you wanted to reflect on from the presentation? I hope I haven't whizzed through it too quickly, but I'm always very mindful in the evening that, you know, you don't want to be kept hanging around.
Lisa, I've got one question. Sorry to jump in. Time frames. Is it recommended or even a good idea, do you think, to have, because we have it, that you have a limited time? You can be re-elected or want to stay on, but all our posts are kind of time limited.
Okay.
Either one or 3 years. Is that seen as a good thing?
Okay, so I would have to say to you that my main answer to that is check in your governing document.
Yeah.
It will depend what clauses are in there. In some cases, you will find that trustees are generally re-elected or elected annually, and quite often you see the same faces coming round, so it is re-elected. So it's technically an annual post. In some cases, the governing document, I have seen them where it actually details the fact that they are re-elected in thirds. So you would have, you know, a third of the committee would step down and the rest of them would remain on, which can be a little bit difficult to manage. And in some cases, you'll get governing documents which actually detail that a chairman can only be in post for a certain amount of years. I think that there are two sides to that argument, and this is kind of probably a personal opinion that I would give now, is the fact that having been a chairman, I think the first year of being a chairman, you're finding your feet, you're getting used to the role and understanding, you know, what you're doing. If then you're replaced, you never really get to grips with that role. So being in post for a few years, I would say, is a good idea. It will depend on the committee, it will depend on the people involved. I think the flip side to it is if you have a chairman who's been in post for 20 years, that can also have its downside because people get very stuck in their roles, and, you know, it can kind of stifle a committee sometimes. So my advice would be look at your governing document, see what your governing document details, and then work out from there what is right for your committee. And it might be that you don't need to amend your governing document, but you want to set down some principles for the committee, that maybe you have a chairman for 3 years before it rotates, or whatever works for your circumstances. But the first place to start is the governing document. I hope that was helpful. It's a bit of a ramble.
Thank you. Perfect.
Okay, good. Were there any other questions? Yeah, Anita.
Not a question. I just wanted to say that I thought it was really valuable, the information about the use and the onboarding of volunteers, because our village hall, quite often we've struggled to get somebody to sit as a trustee, and we're just about to onboard a new trustee next at our next meeting. But the value to me in actually advertising just for volunteers within the village, and maybe we'll get more people coming forward. So that, for some reason, that just hadn't dawned on me at all. It just, we advertise for new trustees for the village hall committee, but not for volunteers. So I think that might take the weight of responsibility off myself and Karen and the rest of the board of the committee.
Yeah.
We know that we've got that little backup of other people within the village that will contribute, and it's like a bolt of lightning. It just didn't even dawn on me that we should even consider kind of sending out our emails and putting posters up and doing all the things that we would do normally to advertise for a trustee, but do that in the same manner as just getting a pool of volunteers for people that can kind of step in for individual events or activities. So I just wanted to say thanks for that.
Oh, no, great. And what you might find is by introducing people into your organisation as volunteers, hopefully they'll like your charity, they'll like the way you work, and they morph into trustees. because they'll get more and more involved and more engaged in the charity, and hopefully that will then translate to new trustees for you as well.
Cool, thank you.
All right, no problem. Okay, so if anybody hasn't got any more questions, you know, you can always ring me, you can always email me if you've got any questions or concerns anyway. But if you haven't got any right now, if I can do the poll at the end, that will be really helpful.